The room was unnervingly quiet, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the constant vibration of a phone lying inches away from her lifeless hand. It buzzed again and again, lighting up the dim apartment with flashes of blue. Each notification revealed a name, the same name, filling the screen with an endless trail of missed calls and unread texts. Detective Harris stood at the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene with the kind of weary familiarity that only comes from years of chasing tragedies. But this one was different. The woman lying on the floor was young, 29 years old, her life cut short in a setting that spoke volumes without words. A half-drunk glass of wine sat on the table. Curtains were drawn tight, as though the room itself had been hiding a secret. The first responders whispered in the background, exchanging clipped words about time of death, signs of struggle, and the strange silence that hung in the air. But Harris's gaze was fixed on the phone. Something about it felt louder than the body itself. He reached for it carefully, slipping on gloves before turning the device toward him. What he saw was a torrent of obsession preserved in digital ink. Hundreds upon hundreds of messages, some pleading, some raging, all from one person. The texts told a story even before he knew the details. "You can't just leave me. I know you're with her. Answer me or I'll come find you." Each message grew darker, more frantic, time-stamped in relentless succession, as though the sender had been consumed by an unquenchable fire. Harris scrolled through pages of messages, his jaw tightening. The desperation was palpable, and yet there was a thread of control, someone trying to manipulate, to bend another person to their will. The last one, sent just hours before her death, chilled him to the core. If I can't have you, no one will. Outside, the city sea arried on, unaware of the storm that had played out within these walls. Neighbors had heard nothing, or at least claimed they hadn't. But one admitted to noticing unusual noises, raised voices muffled by walls, pacing footsteps in the dead of night, the faint sound of someone sobbing. None of them had thought it serious enough to call the police. Now, with flashing lights spilling across the hallway, it was impossible to ignore. As the forensic team began their careful work, Harris directed an officer to trace the number behind the flood of messages. "Start there," he said, his voice firm but low. "Whoever sent these, they're the key." The officer nodded, typing quickly into his tablet. Within moments, a name appeared on the screen. It was ordinary at first glance, just another name among millions. But names carry histories, and this one carried obsession. It belonged to a woman close to the victim, someone who had once been trusted but now was woven into the tragedy that had unfolded. Harris didn't say the name out loud. Not yet. He just stared at the glowing screen, feeling the weight of what was to come. Cases like this rarely ended cleanly. Behind every crime scene was a story of broken hearts, shattered promises, and emotions that spiraled out of control. He had seen it before, but the sheer volume of messages hinted at something deeper, a mind unraveling, a dangerous cocktail of jealousy, love, and rage. One of the younger officers leaned closer, curiosity getting the better of him. "Sir, you think she did it?" Harris didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked back at the victim, her face frozen in a final, silent expression that hovered somewhere between fear and disbelief. "I think," he finally said, "we're about to learn just how far obsession can go." The body was carefully lifted and placed on a stretcher, the room stripped of its last lingering warmth. What remained were shadows and questions. Harris lingered a moment longer, letting the scene settle in his mind like a photograph. He knew this case would not be one of clean lines or simple answers. It was the kind that gnawed at the edges of sleep, the kind that revealed the fragility of human love when twisted into something darker. As the apartment door closed behind him, Harris carried the phone in an evidence bag, its screen still glowing faintly with unread words. Each vibration felt like a pulse from beyond the grave, a reminder that the story hadn't ended with death. It was only beginning. And somewhere in the city, the sender of those hundreds of texts, restless, unstable and consumed, was still out there, unaware that the trail of messages had already begun to write their downfall. What drives a person to send so many words, to cling so desperately to someone who no longer belongs to them? What breaks inside a person when love turns into fixation and fixation into violence? Detective Harris had seen many crimes of passion before, but as he stared at the endless list of messages, he realized this wasn't just passion, it was obsession pushed to the brink of madness. He tucked the phone under his arm and stepped into the night, already knowing the next step. Find the woman behind the messages. Find the heart of the storm. The story was about to unravel, one message at a time. Detective Harris left the crime scene with the victim's phone secured, its screen still buzzing with messages that refused to stay silent. The sender's name glowed like a warning, but to understand what had happened inside that apartment, one had to look backward, into the life of the woman behind those words. Her name was Rachel Turner, 29 years old. A life that from the outside appeared normal enough. She had a job at a small marketing firm, a modest one-bedroom apartment, and a smile that once came easily. But beneath that fragile exterior was a heart cracked open by betrayal, and a mind that could not bear to let go. Rachel's story began months earlier, with the end of He, a relationship with Daniel Blake. Daniel wasn't just her boyfriend. He was the anchor she had clung to through years of uncertainty. For nearly 5 years they shared holidays, whispered promises, and plans for a future that now existed only as shards in Rachel's memory. But love, when it ends, rarely ends evenly. Daniel had walked away with quiet certainty, while Rachel remained holding on to something already gone. What cut deepest wasn't only the breakup, but the fact that he had moved on so quickly. Within weeks, Daniel was seen with someone new, Sophie Williams, a woman whose presence Rachel found unbearable. Rachel's nights became long, restless stretches of silence, broken only by the glow of her phone. She scrolled endlessly through old photos of her and Daniel, vacations, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings captured in digital stillness. Sometimes she convinced herself he would return, that what they had was too strong to abandon. Other times, rage bubbled beneath her ribs, whispering that he had betrayed her, humiliated her, replaced her as though she were disposable. The duality gnawed at her. Love and hate, grief and rage, desire and despair. It was all tangled together until she could no longer tell them apart. She began writing messages to Daniel late at night. At first they were soft, pleading. "I miss you. Can we talk, please? I don't understand how you could just walk away." But when silence answered back, the words hardened. "You can't treat me like this. She doesn't love you like I do. I see you with her. Don't lie to me." Each unanswered text added fuel to a fire she didn't know how to extinguish. By day, Rachel tried to hold herself together. At work, she smiled faintly at co-workers, answering emails, pretending that she was fine. But her eyes often drifted to her phone, waiting for a reply that never came. She skipped lunches, choosing instead to scroll through Daniel's new life, dissecting Sophie's photos and captions. Every detail felt like a knife. At night, when the loneliness was too heavy to bear, Rachel's thoughts grew darker. She sat in the half-light of her apartment, staring at Sophie's face on her phone screen. She compared herself ruthlessly. Rachel's hair, her body, her laugh. In every comparison she found herself lacking, and every wound deepened her determination not to be erased. Her inner voice turned sharp, commanding. "He belongs to you. She's the thief. Don't let them win." The line between rational thought and obsession blurred until she no longer recognized herself. Her best friend Emily noticed the change. One afternoon over coffee she leaned in, concern etched across her face. "Rach, You've got to let this go. He's not coming back. You're only hurting yourself. Rachel forced a brittle smile, stirring sugar into her cup, though she never used sugar. I'm fine. Really. But the lie tasted bitter. When she returned home that evening, her phone lit up with another photo of Daniel and Sophie together, laughing in a park as though the world belonged to them. Rachel's chest constricted. The rage she had tried to bury boiled over, and her fingers flew across the screen, typing faster than she could think. I know what you're doing. You think she makes you happy? You'll regret this. Don't ignore me, Daniel. I won't be ignored. She pressed send before reason could intervene, and when there was no reply, she sent another, then another. Hours passed, and the messages multiplied until her phone was littered with words. Her words, echoing into silence. By dawn, Rachel sat slumped against the couch, her eyes bloodshot, her phone still clutched in her hand. She had crossed an invisible threshold, one she could not step back from. What began as heartbreak had curdled into fixation. And somewhere, deep inside, Rachel believed this was only the beginning. Morning sunlight spilled through Sophie Williams's apartment, catching on the plants she carefully watered every Saturday. She was the kind of person who thrived on simple routines: coffee with oat milk, a morning jog along the river, the comfort of calling her mother every Sunday evening. To those who knew her, Sophie radiated warmth. She worked as a pediatric nurse, and her patients adored her. Children clung to her hand. Parents trusted her calm presence. She had no idea that just by falling in love, she had stepped into the crosshairs of another woman's unraveling mind. Daniel had met Sophie at a friend's gathering, months after leaving Rachel. What struck him first was her laugh. Unforced, genuine, the kind that seemed to soften everything around it. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt peace. Sophie wasn't dramatic or demanding. She didn't play games. She was steady, gentle, and she cared for him without expectation. To Daniel, it felt like a chance at a new beginning. To Rachel, it felt like betrayal carved into her chest. At first, Rachel had tried to ignore Sophie, telling herself she was nothing more than a passing fling. But when the relationship persisted, when the photos began appearing online, Daniel's arm wrapped around Sophie's waist, their smiles caught in sunsets and restaurant dinners, Rachel's denial crumbled. Late at night, she sat hunched over her phone, scrolling through Sophie's social media with obsessive precision. She studied every detail, zooming in on Sophie's smile, her clothes, the way she held Daniel's hand. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was comparison turned into self-torment. She doesn't deserve him, Rachel whispered to herself in the dark. She doesn't know him like I do. The bitterness grew. Where Sophie saw a future, Rachel saw theft, and every time Daniel failed to reply to her texts, Rachel imagined Sophie's hand resting lightly on his chest, Sophie's voice in his ear, Sophie's laughter replacing hers. Her texts became a nightly ritual. The messages started with longing. Daniel, I can't sleep without thinking of you. Remember our trip to the coast. You promised me forever. But when those words vanished into silence, her tone sharpened. So she's worth more than 5 years of us? You're pathetic for leaving me for her. You'll regret this. Daniel read them sometimes, his chest tightening with guilt and unease. He wanted to move forward with Sophie, but Rachel's shadow followed him, demanding attention, haunting every moment he tried to enjoy. Sophie noticed. One evening, as they cooked dinner together in her kitchen, Sophie reached across the counter, her brow furrowed. You've been distant all night. Is everything okay? Daniel hesitated, knife poised above the cutting board. It's Rachel, he admitted. She won't stop texting me. Sophie tilted her head, concern clouding her soft eyes. Do you want me to worry about this? No, he said quickly, forcing a smile. It's just noise. She'll stop. But Rachel didn't stop. If anything, she grew louder, her words multiplying like echoes in an empty chamber. Rachel convinced herself Sophie was watching her, mocking her. She imagined Sophie scrolling through her own feed, laughing at Rachel's misery. The more she thought about it, the more real it felt. She crafted scenarios in her head. Sophie whispering about her. Sophie plotting to erase her entirely. The line between reality and imagination blurred, and with it, Rachel's restraint unraveled further. One night, around 2 a.m., Rachel sat cross-legged on her bed, her face lit only by her phone's glow. Her fingers trembled as she typed, "She's nothing compared to me. I'll prove you're mine. Don't think I don't see what's happening." She pressed send, then stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that never appeared. Silence. Always silence. And with every unanswered message, her fury deepened. Meanwhile, Sophie remained unaware of the scale of Rachel's obsession. She thought Rachel was simply a bitter ex-girlfriend clinging to the past, not realizing the storm gathering just outside the edges of her new happiness. Sophie lived her days with kindness, her evenings with Daniel, blissfully blind to the fact that another woman was dissecting every moment of her life from afar. But Detective Harris, scrolling through Rachel's message history, could already see the storm brewing. He read the timestamps, 2:07 a.m., 2:15 a.m., 2:22 a.m., each one a marker of Rachel's sleepless descent. He knew the story was moving toward violence. He just didn't yet know when it would strike. And Rachel, staring at Sophie's smiling photos one more time, whispered into the silence of her empty room, "If she thinks she can take him from me, she has no idea who I am." Rachel's whispered words in the darkness, "She has no idea who I am," were more than a threat. They were a promise she intended to keep, and the proof of that promise began piling up in Daniel's phone, one message after another, until his screen became a battlefield of her rage. At first, they came slowly, 1 or 2 a day, but by the middle of the week, they arrived in bursts, 5, 10, sometimes 20 in a single hour. Some were desperate, aching for what had been. "Please, Daniel, don't do this to us. I know you still think about me." Others carried venom sharp enough to draw blood. "You disgust me. You're nothing without me. She'll ruin you, and I'll be here when she does." And some blurred the line between love and hate, twisting into manipulation. "If you cared at all, you'd answer me. Do you want me to hurt myself? Is that what you want? You can't block me forever. I'll find a way." Daniel tried to ignore them at first, tossing his phone aside in frustration. But silence seemed to fuel Rachel's fire. The less he responded, the more furious and relentless the messages became. Every time he picked up his phone, another flood awaited him. Hundreds of texts, their timestamps crawling through the hours of the night, told the story of a woman who wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating, wasn't letting go. Sophie began to notice. One evening, as Daniel set his phone face down on the table, she reached over and turned it back over. The screen was filled with notifications, dozens of unread messages from Rachel, stacked one after another like dominoes ready to fall. Sophie's eyes widened. "Daniel," she said softly, "this isn't just noise. This is frightening." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. I don't want to escalate things by blocking her. She's unpredictable." Sophie leaned closer, her voice steady but concerned. "Unpredictable? How?" He hesitated, searching for words. "She doesn't think like other people. She's always been intense, but since the breakup, it's like she's unraveling. I don't know what she might do if I cut her off completely." Sophie looked at him, worry written across her face. "So you're just going to let this continue?" "I don't know what else to do," he admitted, his voice breaking under the weight of it. Meanwhile, Rachel sat in her dimly lit apartment, her phone glowing hot in her hands. She typed furiously, deleting and rewriting, her emotions spilling faster than her fingers could move. "You'll see who really loves you. I won't let her destroy us. Answer me, Daniel. Answer me." Her thumbs trembled as she hit send over and over. Every silence from him felt like rejection, and every rejection dug deeper into her. She told herself she was fighting for love, but her words no longer sounded like love at all. Sometimes she convinced herself he was reading them, savoring them, testing her loyalty by refusing to respond. Other times she believed Sophie was the one holding his phone, deleting Rachel's messages, mocking her pain. Both thoughts drove her wild. Nights became a blur of buzzing screens and unending words. She barely remembered falling asleep, and when she woke, it was always with her phone still clutched in her hand. Messages half-written waiting to be finished. To Rachel, the phone was no longer just a device. It was her lifeline to Daniel, the thread that kept them tied together. She couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't on the other side, even if he refused to speak. Silence to her was not an answer. It was a challenge. For Daniel, the phone became a source of dread. He began leaving it in other rooms, silencing it during work, turning it over so he didn't have to watch Rachel's name light up the screen. But no matter how hard he tried, the weight of her presence seeped into every corner of his life. One night, as he lay beside Sophie, another wave of messages poured in. The screen glowed on the nightstand, buzzing every few seconds like a persistent insect. Sophie turned toward him, her voice breaking the quiet. "Daniel," she whispered, "this isn't going away on its own." Daniel stared at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling with uneasy breaths. He knew she was right. But he also knew something Sophie didn't. Rachel wasn't the type to fade quietly into the background. Blocking her might not silence her, it might provoke her. And in that moment, between the vibrating phone and Sophie's worried eyes, Daniel realized he was trapped. No matter what he did, Rachel's rage was building, pressing against the edges of control, threatening to spill over into something neither of them could contain. Rachel, meanwhile, typed her final message for the night, her heart racing as she pressed send. "If I can't have you, no one will." Rachel's apartment had once been a sanctuary. Friends used to gather on Friday nights for takeout and laughter. Her mother had complimented the way sunlight streamed through the curtains in the mornings, how Rachel had filled the place with books and candles, the markers of a life both full and hopeful. Now, the curtains remained drawn at all hours. The candles burned down to hardened stubs and never got replaced. Empty coffee mugs stacked on the counter. Half-folded laundry lingered on the couch for weeks, forgotten beneath piles of unopened mail. Days slipped into each other. Rachel barely noticed the hours anymore. Her phone dictated time, buzzes, vibrations, the sharp ping of an incoming notification. But Daniel's name rarely appeared. When it did, it was only to say, "Please stop," or "This isn't healthy." Most often, there was silence. At first, she thought silence was a strategy, Daniel trying to break her down. If she wrote the perfect message, struck the right balance between regret and longing, surely he would reply. Her drafts folder became a graveyard of words. Some messages bled apologies. "I know I messed up, but we can start again." Others swung toward accusation. "How can you move on so fast? Did you ever love me?" Still others carried a chilling certainty. "You're mine. You'll see it one day." She didn't send all of them, but she read them again and again, late into the night, whispering them aloud until the words blurred into sobs. Her friends noticed first. Invitations to dinners went unanswered. Calls rang through to voicemail. "She's just going through a breakup," they said at first, giving her space. But weeks stretched on, and space turned into absence. They stopped trying. Her mother left voicemails that grew more worried with each passing day. "Rachel, honey, I know it hurts, call me back, please." Her sister texted, "You can't let him define you. We're here. Come over this weekend." Rachel rarely responded. When she did, her replies were clipped, distracted. She didn't want comfort. She wanted Daniel. The spiral tightened. At night, Rachel sat hunched over her laptop, screen light washing her tired face in an eerie glow. Sophie's social media became an obsession within the obsession. Every photo Sophie posted felt like a wound. A smiling shot of her and Daniel at a cafe, a candid laugh with friends, even a simple photo of a morning coffee. Rachel scrutinized everything. She zoomed in on Sophie's jewelry, the tilt of her head, the words hidden in comments. She convinced herself Sophie was flaunting, taunting, parading what rightfully belonged to her. Sleep became optional. Some nights Rachel didn't even try. She sat on the floor, phone clutched in hand, scrolling endlessly, rereading messages, until dawn crept pale across the blinds. Other nights she dozed on the couch, waking with a start, heart racing, convinced she'd missed a reply from Daniel. Her reflection in the mirror told its own story. Bloodshot eyes, hollow cheeks, unwashed hair tied back in careless knots. The apartment echoed her decline. Plates stacked in the sink, clothes strewn across the floor, stale air that no longer smelled of candles, but of sweat and neglect. On the desk, notebooks filled with frantic writing piled up. Not neat journaling, scrawled sentences, some repeating the same phrase for pages. He loves me. He belongs with me. He'll come back. In her mind, the world had narrowed into a tunnel with one endpoint. Daniel. Family, friends, work. Even her own well-being fell away, dim and irrelevant. The more she lost grip on reality, the more certain she became of her imagined truth. Sophie was temporary. Daniel was inevitable. And yet, beneath the certainty, panic flickered. Every time Sophie posted another photo, every time Daniel ignored another text, Rachel felt the ground shift beneath her. Obsession provided fuel, but it also hollowed her out. She teetered on the edge of a chasm she couldn't name. One night, as rain tapped the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, Rachel sat cross-legged on her bed, phone glowing in her palm. She stared at Daniel's contact picture, an old snapshot from happier days. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She imagined his voice, imagined him softening when he realized she still cared enough to fight for him. Her thumb pressed down. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Rachel's chest tightened, a scream building in her throat. Her voice cracked as she whispered into the darkness, "You can't ignore me forever." She didn't know it yet, but those words marked the threshold. What had once been heartbreak was now something else entirely, something darker, more dangerous. And as the storm outside grew heavier, Rachel's spiral began twisting toward a point of no return. Rain slicked the streets, leaving the pavement glistening under the weak glow of the street lamps. Rachel stood across from Sophie's apartment building, her hood pulled low, breath visible in the cool night air. The storm from earlier had left everything damp, the silence broken only by the occasional hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Her phone felt heavy in her hand, screen lit with Daniel's name. She had called him 3 times already that night. No answer. The rejection pressed against her chest like a vice. When the building's front door finally opened, Rachel's pulse spiked. Daniel stepped out, Sophie close behind him, her arm brushing his. They were laughing softly, unaware of the figure across the street watching. It was unbearable. Seeing the casual intimacy that Rachel once owned, the easy way Sophie leaned into him. "Daniel." Rachel's voice cracked as it cut through the quiet. They froze. Sophie instinctively drew closer to him, her laughter silenced, eyes narrowing with confusion. Daniel turned toward the sound, jaw tightening the moment he recognized her. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" His tone carried both disbelief and fatigue. She crossed the street quickly, ignoring the puddles soaking through her shoes. "You don't answer my calls. You don't respond to my messages. What choice do you give me?" Her voice wavered between pleading and accusation. Sophie's gaze flicked between them, piecing together what this was. "Daniel, Is this? Yes, Rachel snapped before he could answer. I'm Rachel, the woman he loved, the woman he still loves, whether he admits it or not. Sophie stiffened. Daniel stepped forward, holding up a hand as if to calm the storm. Rachel, stop. This isn't the place. Not the place? Her laugh was sharp, brittle. Where is the place then, Daniel? After midnight, outside her apartment while you pretend she's the only one who matters? Sophie's voice trembled but carried steel. You shouldn't be here. You need to leave. Rachel's eyes locked on Sophie, brimming with venom. You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just slide into my life, take everything I built with him. But you're nothing more than a stand-in. A replacement. Daniel stepped between them now, voice firm. Rachel, that's enough. No, it's not enough! Rachel shouted, her voice echoing down the empty street. You don't get to erase me like I never existed. After everything you walk away like I'm disposable, and her— She jabbed a finger towards Sophie. She gets the pieces of me you stole. Sophie's hand trembled as she gripped Daniel's arm. Daniel, let's go inside, please. Rachel's face twisted, tears streaming now, though anger lit every word. You can't run from me. You can't pretend we didn't share years-long memories. You can't give her what you promised me. Daniel's voice cracked, frustration finally breaking through. Rachel, I don't love you anymore. Do you hear me? It's over. It's been over. You have to let go. The words struck like a physical blow. Rachel staggered back a step, breath catching in her throat. For a moment, silence reigned, just the sound of rain dripping from the eaves, her ragged breathing, Sophie's fearful stillness. Her voice softened, broken. You don't mean that. I do, he said, voice steady now. I care about you, but not like that. Not anymore. This— He gestured at the three of them, at the raw night around them. Has to stop. Rachel's gaze darted between them, desperation twisting into rage. You'll regret this, Daniel. You'll see what she really is. She'll never love you like I did. Never. Daniel didn't answer. He turned, pulling Sophie gently but firmly toward the apartment steps. Sophie cast one last wary glance over her shoulder before disappearing inside with him. Rachel stood alone in the rain-soaked street, the glow of the apartment entrance fading as the door shut behind them. Her chest heaved, fists clenched at her sides. Humiliation burned hotter than the chill in her bones. She had come seeking recognition, maybe reconciliation. Instead, she had been dismissed, Cassie's, teetered aside in front of the woman she loathed most. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. For a wild moment she thought it was Daniel, reaching back. But when she pulled it out, the screen was empty of his name. Just a meaningless notification. She hurled it onto the wet pavement, the sound cracking against the silence. Tears mixed with raindrops on her cheeks as she whispered into the night, He'll regret this. She'll regret this. Rachel picked up her phone, wiped it against her sleeve, and tucked it back into her pocket. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from something far darker. The confrontation had left her stripped bare, but not broken. In the shadows of the street, her fury was already reshaping into resolve. She turned away from the glowing apartment window, her figure swallowed by the dark. Somewhere deep inside, a line had been crossed, one she couldn't uncross. And as the storm clouds rolled away, Rachel carried the storm within her. Rachel walked home from Sophie's apartment drenched, her shoes squelching with each step. But the cold barely registered. Inside her chest, something had snapped. The humiliation of Daniel's words, I don't love you anymore, played in her head like a cruel recording, looping until it hollowed her out. By the time she reached her apartment, her anger had replaced the ache. She slammed the door shut, leaning against it as if to hold back the world. Her small living room was dim, curtains drawn tight, air thick with the stale smell of forgotten meals. On the coffee table, empty bottles, unpaid bills. and her phone glowed faintly. She stared at the screen. No new messages. Rachel collapsed onto the couch, head in her hands. "He'll regret it," she whispered. "She'll regret it." Hours bled into each other as she replayed the confrontation. Daniel's firm tone, Sophie's smug fear, the way they left her standing there like a discarded shadow. The humiliation festered, twisting grief into something sharper. She began to pace the room, barefoot, eyes wild. "They think they're safe because I'm weak," she muttered. "Because I beg. Because I cry. But I'm not weak. I loved him more than she ever will." Her words grew louder, as if she needed to convince herself. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her unsent drafts, paragraphs of rage, pages of pleas, half-finished apologies. Each one was a ghost of what she couldn't say aloud. Her thumb hovered over Daniel's name again, but she stopped. No. Words weren't enough anymore. She went to the kitchen, opening drawers with frantic energy. Forks, spoons, clutter. She yanked open another. Her hand stopped on the cold handle of a kitchen knife. She lifted it, staring at her reflection in the dull blade. Her breath trembled. "This is the only way he'll understand," she whispered. "This is how I end the pain." The thought terrified her, and yet it felt like clarity. A sick kind of peace washed through her veins. For weeks she had spiraled in helplessness, drowning in rejection. Now, at last, there was direction, purpose. Rachel placed the knife on the counter, stepping back as if testing herself. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, eyes hollow, hair unkempt, skin pale beneath exhaustion. She hardly recognized the woman gazing at her. "Justice," she said softly. "Not weakness. Justice." Her phone buzzed suddenly, jolting her. A spam email. Nothing from Daniel. Still, the vibration lit a spark of determination. If he wouldn't listen to her voice, then he'd listen to her silence broken by something he couldn't ignore. She sank into the couch again and began to write. Not a message, not a plea, but a plan. Pages of her notebook filled with frantic scrawl, times, places, words she imagined saying. She wrote Sophie's name again and again, circling it, stabbing her pen through the paper until it tore. Rachel's mind twisted memory into narrative. She wasn't the villain. She was the woman betrayed, erased, pushed aside. Sophie was the intruder, the thief who had stolen everything she had built with Daniel. And Daniel, he was blind, fooled by her smile, tricked into thinking he was free. She convinced herself she was not preparing for violence, but for restoration. "I'll give him back his life," she reasoned. "I'll take away the poison that's ruined everything." The knife glinted under the dim kitchen light, waiting. As dawn approached, the city outside stirred back to life. Rachel hadn't slept. She stood by the window, blinds slightly open, watching the world move as if nothing had changed. But inside her apartment, everything had. Her hands no longer trembled. Her thoughts, though dark, were steady. She wrapped the knife carefully in a dish towel and slipped it into her bag. Her heart thudded, but with an eerie calm. She rehearsed the words she would say to Sophie, each syllable carrying weight. "You don't belong here. He was mine. He'll always be mine." By the time sunlight broke through the blinds, Rachel was dressed and ready. She checked her reflection one last time. Pale, but determined. Shattered, but resolved. "Tonight," she whispered to herself. "It ends tonight." She turned off the light, grabbed her bag, and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind her with a heavy click, echoing down the silent corridor. Rachel didn't look back. Evening settled like a heavy shroud over the city, the streets glowing with amber lamps and the occasional pulse of headlights. Rachel moved through it unseen, her hood pulled low, her steps measured. The bag at her side felt unbearably heavy, not because of its size, but because of what it carried. Inside, the knife rested, swaddled in the dish towel she had wrapped it with at dawn. Her mind hummed with a strange calm, the kind that arrives not in peace, but in surrender. She had rehearsed this in her head for hours, each scenario playing out like a grim rehearsal on a stage only she could see. Tonight was no longer abstract. Tonight was the performance. She lingered near Sophie's building, leaning against a lamppost, pretending to scroll her phone. People passed without noticing. The city was too busy to care about one woman waiting outside an apartment block. But Rachel's pulse quickened every time the entrance door opened, her eyes scanning for the one face she needed to see. Finally, Sophie appeared. She wore a light jacket, her hair falling loose, phone pressed to her ear. Rachel's stomach knotted. Even from across the street, Sophie looked effortlessly radiant, like someone who belonged to Daniel, like someone who belonged to life. Rachel's breath sharpened. The world narrowed until there was only Sophie moving across the sidewalk, laughing softly into her phone. Rachel crossed swiftly, intercepting her path. Sophie blinked in surprise. "Rachel?" Her name, spoken with startled recognition, was gasoline on a fire. Rachel forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." "I don't think—" Sophie began, voice tight with unease. Rachel stepped closer, cutting her off. "You've taken everything from me. Daniel, my life. Do you even understand what you've done?" Sophie's brow furrowed. She lowered her phone. "Rachel, this isn't healthy. You need help. Danny—"
"Il has moved on, and so should you." The words sliced deeper than any blade could. Rachel's throat constricted. "You think you get to decide what's healthy for me? You think you know what I've lost?" Sophie took a step back, glancing toward the entrance as if gauging whether to run inside. Her voice softened, tinged with pity. "I'm sorry, but this isn't the way." Rachel's grip tightened on the strap of her bag. Pity. That expression, gentle, dismissive pity, was unbearable. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Don't you dare look at me like that," Rachel hissed. "Like I'm broken. Like I'm something you can just brush away." Sophie's hand rose instinctively, as though to placate her. "Please, let's just end this here. Go home, Rachel." Something snapped. Rachel's body moved before thought could intervene. Her hand dove into the bag, pulling free the wrapped knife. Sophie's eyes widened, horror spilling across her face. "Rachel!" But Rachel lunged. The knife tore through fabric, through flesh, as Rachel drove it forward with a desperate cry. Sophie's scream shattered the quiet street, echoing between the brick walls. She stumbled back, clutching at the wound, but Rachel pressed in again, her breath ragged, her movements wild. Each strike blurred into the next. The world dissolved into red. Red on Sophie's jacket, red on Rachel's hands, red dripping to the pavement. Sophie's cries turned to gasps, then whimpers, then silence. When it was done, Rachel staggered back, chest heaving. The knife slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto the wet ground. Sophie lay crumpled, eyes wide, lips parted as if caught mid-sentence. The glow of the street lamp painted her face pale, lifeless. Rachel stared, hands shaking, heart slamming against her ribs. This was supposed to bring relief, an end to the torment. But standing over Sophie's body, she felt no peace, only a cavernous emptiness, as if she had torn out her own soul. From a nearby window, curtains shifted. A neighbor, alerted by the screams, leaned out and froze at the sight below. "Oh my God!" a voice cried. Rachel snapped her head upward, eyes locking on the horrified face above. Moments later, The wail of sirens rose in the distance, sharp and unrelenting. Blue and red lights flickered against the night sky, drawing closer. Rachel's breath quickened. She looked down at Sophie's still body, then at her own bloodied hands. Her panic surged. She stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the slick pavement. The sirens grew louder, filling the street, bouncing off the walls like a countdown. Rachel pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound only grew. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. For a fleeting instant, she knelt beside Sophie, brushing a trembling hand against her cheek. Tears blurred her vision. "I just wanted him to see me," she whispered, voice breaking. "I just wanted him to love me again." But Sophie could not hear her. The first patrol car screeched to a halt at the corner, doors flinging open. Officers shouted commands, their voices urgent, weapons drawn. Neighbours gathered at windows, some recording, others clutching their mouths in shock. Rachel stood, dazed, arms raised half-heartedly, as though surrendering to something larger than the law itself. She had crossed the line long ago. Tonight was simply the world catching up. The knife glinted on the pavement, bathed in flashing blue and red, a silent testament to the storm that had consumed her. And above it all, the night was split by sirens, screaming, relentless, merciless. The night after Sophie's murder blurred into chaos. Sirens, flashing lights, officers swarming the blood-stained pavement. Rachel was taken into custody, silent, her clothes soaked with rain and crimson. Her eyes seemed vacant, as though she had already left the world around her. At the station, detectives sorted through the bag she carried. Inside, alongside the knife wrapped in a now-stained dish towel, lay her phone. The device vibrated with useless notifications, spam, missed calls, automated reminders, but it was what lay inside that drew the investigators in. When they opened her messaging history, the story unfolded in stark, damning detail. Hundreds of texts stretched across the screen, desperate words stacked one after another like bricks in a wall of madness. Each message was a fragment of Rachel's unraveling mind. "Why won't you answer me? You said you loved me once. Doesn't that mean anything? If you ignore me again, I'll come find you. Don't make me do it. She'll never love you like I did." The timestamps painted a chilling picture. Messages sent at 2 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, every hour in between. Entire nights where she had typed without pause, her emotions spiraling across the glowing screen, while Daniel left them unread. The detectives scrolled in silence, the room heavy with the gravity of obsession turned lethal. This wasn't just rage. It was a descent meticulously documented, word by word, threat by threat. When Rachel was finally placed in the interrogation room, the facade of calm she had worn at the scene began to crack. The room was small, its white walls sterile, the hum of the fluorescent light relentless. She sat across from 2 officers, her hands trembling, wrists bound by cold steel. One leaned forward. "Rachel, we need to understand what happened tonight. Why Sophie? Why now?" Rachel's eyes flicked up, wet with tears, then down again. "You don't get it. None of you get it. He was mine. For years he was mine. You can't just erase that. You can't let someone walk in and steal everything from you." Her words tumbled out, jagged and frantic. At times her voice rose in fury, at others it softened into pleading confessions. "I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted him to see me again, to remember what we had." But she stood there, looking at me like I was nothing, like I was pathetic. I couldn't stand it. The officer across from her let the silence hang before replying. "Rachel, the messages, the threats, you knew what you were planning." Rachel shook her head violently, hair falling into her face. "No, I wrote them, but I didn't mean them. I wanted him to respond. I wanted him to care. They were just words, until she made them real." Her breakdown was part confession, part desperate self-justification. She twisted her hands against the cuffs, tears dripping onto the table. "I loved him.
That's all I ever did wrong. I loved him too much." The officers exchanged a glance. The evidence spoke for itself. The hundreds of messages, the knife, the eyewitness accounts. It all drew a straight line from obsession to tragedy. Days later, Sophie's funeral was held. The church pews filled with mourners, friends, family and colleagues who remembered her as kind, generous, full of life. The casket lay at the front, adorned with white lilies. The air smelled of incense and grief. Daniel sat in the front row, hands clenched together, his face pale. He had not spoken much since that night. People approached, whispered condolences, but he barely responded. His eyes never strayed from the coffin, as if waiting for Sophie to open her eyes again. He carried the weight of two losses: the woman he loved, buried before him, and the woman he once loved, now behind bars for her death. The guilt of it pressed against him like stone. Could he have done more? Could he have seen the warning signs in those hundreds of texts, those unanswered calls? As the service ended, the mourners filed out slowly. Daniel remained, staring in silence, haunted. Outside, the world moved on, cars passing, children laughing on the sidewalk, the rhythm of life undisturbed. But for those who knew Sophie, and for those who would forever read Rachel's messages as a record of dissent, time felt fractured. The texts told the story in cold, undeniable detail. A digital diary of heartbreak that grew into fixation, of obsession that morphed into violence. The question lingered, whispered in the silence of the emptying church, etched into the minds of everyone who knew the truth. Was this madness preventable? Or was it always inevitable?